There are a lot of things that go into the creation and development of video games. There's musical and voice acting recordings. There's art and texture assets that need to be designed. There's the actual design of how a game is laid out and how it will work for the player. But one of the more overlooked things, especially earlier on in the industry's history, were the tools that were used to make all of these things into a complete package. Sometimes called middleware for their position between the hardware and the software products. They were usually invisible to the player, beyond maybe a logo flashed the start screen of a game or the back of a box. But they were, and are, integral to the creation of video games, as they became and continue to get more and more complex. It's very difficult to start every project from flat ground, and much more reasonable to start with a solid foundation, or even a few floors to the building already completed, so the creators could focus on the interior and exterior design of their products that consumers were going to inhabit. When games moved from 2D to 3D in the mid-1990s, and the technical complexity of how they would work and how they would be made suddenly jumped exponentially, there was not only a quick gold rush and arms race to come up with new hardware that would accelerate and make 3D rendering easier to relieve the burden on the rest of the computer or console hardware, there was also a gold rush and arms race to come up with pre-built tools or engines that would take a significant amount of the complexity out of software development to work on these new kinds of 3D games. The need and application for middleware tools like this was not just limited to games, as our story today starts with the European branch of the photography and imaging company Canon, which in the early 1990s stood up a division called Criterion Software to work on graphics generation software, since they, like other companies in the digital image media space, recognized the importance of being ready to move into digital computer graphics. This led the way to the introduction of their software toolkit, called RenderWare, way back in 1993. But they were not alone in seeing the potential for this kind of middleware software. As the 90s went on and the need for 3D engines and development environments started to explode mid-decade, they were joined in this race by very capable competitors, such as Argonaut Software, which introduced the B-Render system. Unlike Canon's Criterion Software division, Argonaut Software was deeply entrenched in the video game market, having famously worked with Nintendo to bring out one of the groundbreaking 3D games on consoles, with Star Fox for the Super Nintendo. They also had a minor hit with the Croc series. This gave Criterion the idea that they too needed to dip their feet into the video game market to demonstrate and bolster the usability of their RenderWare tools for the purpose of making games. So, they spun up a team within Criterion Software, simply called Criterion Studios, in early 1996. This studio would make a few 3D games for the PC as demonstrations of the technical capabilities of their software tools. With the release of the next generation systems coming up, they transitioned to the Dreamcast, where they developed one of the more technically impressive launch titles, a hoverboarding racing game called Trick Style, as well as a few other games. After receiving their PS2 development kits early in 2000, the studio and its new creative director, Alex Ward, decided they had the opportunity to do something new, while also demonstrating the power and style of the RenderWare engine for the PS2, a system desperately in need of development tools, as Sony had shocked the third-party community with their relative lack of a comprehensive set of middleware systems compared with the original PlayStation, and with the far more esoteric design of the new hardware. The unusual thing that Ward would later share in interviews was that their studio also received some very early Dolphin development kits before that system was even known as the GameCube. Ward would tell interviewers at IGN later on that himself and others on the team were fans of the fast-paced arcade racing titles from Sega, like Crazy Taxi and Sega Rally, and also knew they didn't stand much of a chance taking on the realistic offerings like Gran Turismo, so they decided to try and find a niche and fill it as best they could. Ward himself remembered back to his experiences with the very first Need for Speed title on the Panasonic 3DO, not particularly for its realistic racing, but for the joy of twisting the gameplay to have cars crash into each other. The pure stupid joy that came with this gave them the idea. Could we try and make a game with just this concept? Obviously folks would find it fun if we could pull it off, so they went for it. Just making a game where you crash cars like a child playing with their toys would be closer to a tech demo than a game, so they also observed the trick and reward system from SSX and tried to find a way to gamify the act of smashing and crashing for fun. But they also took a very deliberate and direct stand against feature creep and bloatware by making sure they made a tight, small, compact experience, rather than following the trend of trying to one-up competing titles with more tracks, more cars, or more modes. They instead wanted to provide the game its depth by giving it heavy replay value from the complexity of its gameplay, rather than the bulk of its features to check off. In addition to this preference for a smaller, more polished package, he also noted that the team that developed this title, originally just called Shiny Red Car, consisted of just 6 people. 2 part-time programmers, 1 full-time programmer, and 3 designers. In early 2001, the game would get its official announcement via the publisher they had found for the game, Acclaim, when the company announced it would be publishing the latest creation from Criterion Studios, now titled Burnout. It would release for the PlayStation 2 later that year in November and become a surprise hit. Being a small and dedicated company, Criterion Studio would actually take the PS2 original and work on it and polish it up to improve it for its Xbox and GameCube releases, which would come at the very end of April 2002. So with the promise of an actually improved port, let's see if that's really the case. Right off the bat, as the game boots, we get one major technical improvement. Burnout supports progressive scan on the GameCube, which it didn't on the PS2. So we're going to get higher quality, more crisp images here. Something very few third-party developers on the GameCube bothered to do, and a good sign that Criterion was indeed serious about buffing up this version. Another nice feature we're offered right out of the gate is an autosave. A few other games we've played have had it as an optional feature that can be turned on, but in this era it was still mostly a manual thing to save your game, so this is a nice bonus for the player. All these nice cutting-edge features are in the options menu as well. You can also enable Dolby Surround Sound. But in a first, we get the chance to set the aspect ratio of the game content between 4:3 and 16:9, giving you a more perspective-correct view on widescreen TVs, which I was using and capturing. So we really do have a full complement of all the technical features one could want in 2002. Just to cross off the other menu item, we also have high scores, if you're interested in playing this like an arcade game and racking up top scores. There's also a specials menu that gives you a few other niceties. There's a music playback section where you can sample the game's soundtrack. There's the credits for the teams involved. But there's also crash replays, where you can play back clips of all the times you crashed your vehicle in the game. Although, saving these separately for later playback can certainly chew up space on your 59-block memory card pretty quickly. Now getting into the remaining modes, we take a look at the actual gameplay, since all of the modes are just a variation on the same gameplay loop. To try and put it in a nutshell, playing this game for the very first time, it became very apparent to me that the developers weren't kidding about their inspiration from Sega arcade games. Really, I was immediately drawn to describe this game as an exquisite combination of 2 popular Dreamcast games mashed into one, Crazy Taxi and Metropolis Street Racer. Burnout has the realistic environments, graphics, and cars from Metropolis and its spiritual successor, Project Gotham Racing, while setting you up for the kind of reckless, dangerous, high-speed maneuvering that comes from Crazy Taxi. The key addition here is that you are the opposite of the kind of indestructible protagonists you play as in those games. Don't count on being able to just casually plow over a light pole or clip past another car. Instead, the slightest slip up behind the wheel will send you into the game's gratuitous bullet-time crash mode, showing off the detailed car models, collision physics, and particle distributions emerging from your crashing vehicles. This is the kind of graphical grandstanding that Criterion was going for, and makes an excellent demo reel for showing what its software platform could do. You even have control to move forward and backward and pause the whole event at different speeds. Of course, contrary to popular opinion, the point of the game isn't to crash, it's to race and win. But with an arcade-style time limit and very talented AI racers to compete with, you're certainly under the gun to keep up the pace while avoiding traffic. But you're simultaneously given an incentive to try and pull off these death-defying feats, because you're given a boost bar that needs to be filled by successfully pulling off close calls, slaloms in traffic, and other maneuvers. If you can fill your bar to completion, you get to engage a turbo fast mode, similar to what we saw in Wave Race Blue Storm. Something so ludicrously fast you'll probably want to keep it for straightaways. Personally, I kinda found this bar pretty difficult to fill, as the game lops off massive chunks of the meter when you crash, and gives you fairly small amounts for pulling off moves. I only managed to fill it maybe 2 times while playing. Between all of the single-player modes, the gameplay remains the same. You can choose a single race to practice on a singular course, or you can take the time attack mode to try and get your best times, although any of these modes still has the arcade countdown timer there. The championship mode also features the same races, but if you manage to successfully win the available races, you can unlock new maps to race. So that's where the progression comes in, and offers a bit more value and content to the game. Since I mentioned single-player modes, that means there's also multiplayer modes, where you do the old-fashioned split screen and race courses, which is technically impressive for rendering this nice world twice over. And that's where the bulk of praise should be given for this game. While it's an arcade-style game, both in its gameplay and in the amount of content presented here, it's a real graphical showcase, both for Criterion's development platform, as well as for the power of current-generation hardware. With tons of very crisp high-resolution textures, very detailed and well-modeled vehicles, excellent light shading on all those vehicles, it's one of the best-looking games we've seen so far this generation, and on the GameCube, up there with Rogue Squadron 2. On the matter of getting upgraded from the PS2, as we mentioned at the start, Nintendo's version gets progressive scan output, giving it a visual edge right out of the gate. But the PS2 version does manage to have some nicer reflections and shinier looking car models, but suffers from the issues of visual quality when it comes to anti-aliasing that system was well known to have trouble with, compared to its competitors, and which was a built-in hardware feature for the GameCube. The programmers also tightened up the controls a bit between these versions and tweaked the skybox in the background, if you even noticed that while playing such a fast-paced game. Considering the developers actually put in a solid effort to tune and meet the GameCube version on equal or better terms than its competitors, it's fitting this game actually appears to have pulled off some surprisingly competitive sales as well. Burnout was not a huge seller on any platform, being a brand new idea being dropped by Acclaim, but the PlayStation 2 version sold 740,000 units, with the GameCube bringing in a respectable, by comparison, 300,000 units, and outselling the Xbox, which only mustered 130,000 units. For once, the GameCube is playing a good game in terms of sales, and it looks like the extra effort from the developer might have paid off. We'll see if they continue to keep that up down the road.